So I partially wanted to record this so I can go over my own method of writing. And I'll just start off with the first thing, which people usually ask, is like, how did you come up with that idea? Where did you come up with this? What inspires you? And that's a mixed bag for me, because some of my ideas are inspired by things that exist. Some of them are just random dreams that I'll have, or like daydreams or dreams at night, where I just have this one scene, and that's usually how it starts out, is I'll have one scene of action that I see in my brain. Like the last story I wrote about this character who can take the elements of the earth, like water, and he turns it into this orb of power. And that all started out with me just imagining this like hobo-looking guy on top of a mountain, putting his hand up, and then he like chants or something, and all the snow and the ice and the wind and everything just coalesces into his hand and creates an orb. And that was the beginning of my last writing project. And from there, it became, okay, that's a cool visual. How do I write a story around that? So I came up with like 6 or 7 ideas, like all these orbs are created and they have to be placed at certain places on the earth to restore it back to its former glory, I should say. Or the different elemental orbs are fused within a person, or the orbs are shot out to different places around the solar system and they have to be brought back. And all of these different stories, like I was just trying to figure out a way for this to all make sense and to make it interesting. And I eventually settled on the story that I wrote. And the story that I wrote was a man with this ability to take the remaining amount of that resource, that element, turn it into this orb. And then eventually, once he creates, I think 6 or 7, he can use his ability to pretty much wipe the slate clean for the planet and restore life to it the way it should, like it was before it was corrupted. And the story deals with a lot of nature versus technology and industry, and the power of corruption, the power of greed, and a lot of human emotion. And it's very, very cut and dry. It is set in a fantasy world, but it's very cut and dry. Like, there's good and there's bad. And some of the characters, actually, I wouldn't say some of the good and some of the bad is very cut and dry, but there's also some gray area, because one of the main characters is on the quote-unquote bad side, but he thinks what he's doing is the right thing to do because that's all he's ever known. And he's not doing it out of evil intentions. He's doing it because he thinks he's doing the right thing. And I wanted people, and I wrote him in a way that I wanted the people to read it to sort of empathize with him, because he does have his own backstory. He does have his own fears, his own emotions, and he's not just like bad guy number 3 with no emotion or human connection, so everyone doesn't, like, no one would like him. And from there, after I figured out the story that I wanted to write, you have to figure out how to start writing it. And that's usually the big thing for me, because I can come up with a plot line and I can write it from A to Z on one page, like this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and then the ending result is going to be, Z is this happens, the story's over, and then I'm done. But actually starting what A is supposed to sound like, what it's supposed to look like, the first 3 sentences you read when you open the book, that's hard, because you have to think about, where in the timeline do you want to begin? Where in the story do you want to pick up and start narrating it? Because that's what it is. If you think about writing, like a book, is just imagining that the universe you're writing about is real, and you're just taking one snapshot of that universe and writing about it. Like, stuff existed before it, stuff will exist after the book ends, and you're just beginning with this one piece of information. It's like if someone wanted to write a story about World War I. Where do you start? Do you start 20 years before World War I and then have a lead up to it and everything that led up to the war happening? Do you start like day 3 of the war? It's already happened and shit is already happening. Or do you go halfway through, it's almost over? And that's the other thing, is you have to figure out what character's point of view are you going to see this world through, this story through. Because going back to that World War I scenario, you could pick Franz Ferdinand. You can start from his point of view, and then the story shifts because he dies. And he's what a lot of people say is the jumping off point for the war. Or you can pick a random soldier who's in the war and have his point of view be the beginning. Or a random person who, maybe a person in like America who isn't involved in the war, but they can see it happening. So with writing, you have to figure out where in the timeline do you want to begin? Whose point of view do you want to have as the very beginning? Because once you start, you can shift it. You can shift back and forth, but when you start, you have to figure out whose point of view and whose piece of information is going to be the catalyst to make the reader want to keep reading. What is going to draw them in, and what is going to keep them wanting to read more. And from there, you can go anywhere. But the hardest part, at least for me, and I don't know if it's for any other writer out there, is to figure out how to start the story. Like, I'll have the entire plot line out and know how I want to end it and what things have to transpire to get to that ending. But sitting down and trying to write that first sentence is usually the hardest thing. And sometimes it'll just like come to me and I'll just write it and then I'll delete it after I've started the story, because I just need something to start it with. And with the current thing that I'm writing now, I started it out just this little snapshot of the main character's life. She's in her house. Her brother is working on a car, and then it just shows a little snapshot of like where they live, how they live, what kind of things she deals with. And it's supposed to be just this, little caption of her life. Now, I could have started the story 20 years before she's even born, and it would still be the same story with the same ending. But since she's the main character, I wanted to start with her and set her up, since we're going to be with her most of the story. Which I know people who've read Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter starts out with Harry Potter as a baby and his life with his aunt and his uncle. That's the very beginning of that book, which it's not really from his perspective, but it is about his upbringing. So he is still a main part of the beginning of that. And that's the struggle, I think, is trying to figure out how to begin. For this story, it took me a couple weeks to figure out how I wanted to start it. And that's the other and the other thing about this one, this longer book that I'm writing, is the way I came up with it is completely different from the other shorter story that I talked about earlier about the guy and the orbs. Because that was just a random idea. I saw this scene in my head and then I had to write it. The story I'm writing now is actually a combination of two different things. When I was 16, I played a bunch of Final Fantasy, and I loved 12. I loved 7, I loved 10, and I loved 12. And 12, I really liked the world they were in. And I decided that I wanted to write my own Final Fantasy, fan fiction type story, but it wasn't based off of characters that actually existed. I was going to try and create my own, Final Fantasy 13, I guess I could say, with all the Final Fantasy cliches, but it was going to be mine. So I came up with a bunch of characters and a bunch of backstory, and I drew a really basic world map and alliances, and I talked about what countries had what, like exports and imports, and I did all that. And I had nowhere to start. I didn't know how to start the story, because it was going to be 3 books. Like when I was 16, I was planning on writing 3 books. The first book was just going to be about one character and how he was going to try and find his brother, his long-lost brother, who he just assumed was alive. And the second book was going to be about this heir to a throne who was on the completely other side of the world from the first main character, and how his story was kind of going on at the same time as the other one. And they were eventually going to meet up in the third one and be together, fighting this like war on 2 different fronts, but they were going to be like the same, like allies pretty much. And I wrote all that down, and I had, character names and bios for a couple of them, and I just had that stored away because I could never start it. I didn't know how to start it. Plus, back then, I wasn't really that good of a writer. Most of the stuff that I wrote when I was between 15 and 18 was related. It was either massively copying some other story that I'd heard. Like, I remember I was trying to write a Final Fantasy or a Resident Evil story, but it was ripping off Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 so hard because I just played Resident Evil 4 at the time and I loved Leon Kennedy that I wanted to write a story like that, and it was so garbage. And another thing that I wrote was a companion piece to one of the Halo books that I was reading from Sergeant Johnson's perspective when it wasn't in the book. So I was writing that. I think I eventually deleted that. I don't have that anymore, but it probably sounded like crap. And then a lot of the other stuff I wrote when I was a teenager was a lot of Mary Sue stuff, about me getting a girlfriend, or about me being someone who I wasn't. Like, one of the biggest Mary Sues that I wrote was about this guy who had this reoccurring dream about this girl. And in dreams, they treated it as if it was like a parallel universe, and they were falling in love with each other. And the guy's story at his school was he was attractive, he did karate, he could draw really well, and like all of these things that I wish I could do when I was a teenager, he could do them. And he mentioned that the school that he went to was kind of like the way I would put it is kind of like a harem anime. It's like this one guy is flooded with all these girls, but he doesn't want any of them because they aren't his type. And they're all super attractive, like none of them are ugly, but they're not good enough for him because he was falling in love with this quote-unquote dream girl. And then the next, it's the beginning of it is the dream, and then he goes to his school and does like a narration because it's all from his point of view. And then during school, he sees that girl because she's real, because she just moved to that school, and he's floored. He's like, this can't be true. And then they both fall unconscious because they're just they're faint because of what it is. And then when they faint, they both go back into that dream, and they're like, you're real, but you're real. And it was a stupid fucking thing that I wrote, which I still have somewhere in a folder, which a couple years after I wrote it, I was like, I'm going to rewrite that because I really like that story. And then another one that I wrote, which was terrible, like I've gone back and reread it, and it is just garbage, is another sort of Mary Sue where I'm the main character. I get killed in a car crash, and my girlfriend, who just broke up with me, is super upset about breaking up with me. And I'm roaming around as a ghost, seeing all this happen, and then I, get a second chance to fix everything that I did wrong. And, to to, save my own life and be with my girlfriend, which at the time, I didn't have a girlfriend. When I was a teenager, I never had a girlfriend until I was like 18. But I wrote all these when I was like 16 because I really wanted a girlfriend. That's pretty pathetic. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I used to write back then. And then I came up with this Final Fantasy like fan fiction story, and I wanted to write that so bad, but my writing ability was so terrible, I didn't think I'd do it justice, so I never did it. And then when I was in college, a couple of years ago, me and my roommate. Well, my roommate was a big cosplayer. He liked to dress up and go to the Renaissance Festival dressed up in the actual clothing, and he always talked about like going to the Renaissance Festival in steampunk clothes. And he got me into steampunk a lot because he would like buy Nerf guns and refashion them and make them look like they were steampunk weapons, and make clothes and stuff. And then we decided that me, him, and our other roommate were going to create characters for ourselves when we went out and cosplayed. And he was going to be Kale. His name is Kale, which I, used in this story. Mine was going to be Monty, and the other guy was going to be Lucius. And we were going to be... Monty was going to be a mechanic. Kale was going to be like a street rat type kid. And Lucius was going to be this, like, sort of uppity... higher district kid or guy who went down into the lower districts and became friends with the two of them, so the three of them just go on shenanigans. And that was going to be our backstory. And then back then I wanted to write a story about those three characters because it just interested me, and I really wanted to make some sort of fiction story about it. So I came up with this story about how my brother was kidnapped and we had to go find him, and then we kind of got turned back on reality, and we started recruiting more of our friends from college to be characters in this story as if we were going to play it out in real life. And I put that aside. So last year, the year before, I was going through a bunch of my old stuff because I wanted to find out how many work in progress I had, because I wanted to make a sort of timeline. It was like, I'm going to work on this, and then if I can't finish this, I'm going to work on something else, and figure out all the projects that I had out in the air, and figure out which ones I wanted to actually finish. And I came across those two, which was the Final Fantasy story and the steampunk story. And at first, I was just going to write the steampunk one and leave the Final Fantasy one, but then I decided that I was going to combine the two, which I have, and that's what this actual 40,000 words is my combination of my Final Fantasy story and my steampunk story. So I kept the characters Monty and Kale. I turned Lucius from a boy into a girl, so that's Lucy. And the same story is there. My brother gets kidnapped. We have to go find him. Now, the stuff from the Final Fantasy story that I transferred over is related to the greater world, the interactions between the different races, the greater scale of everything, and some of the characters from the Final Fantasy story I translated into characters in this new one that Monty and his friends will meet on their journey. And this story went from just being a Final Fantasy ripoff or a steampunk story into a sort of combination between the two. And I took a lot of parallels from real life and put them into the story. Like, there's a parallel country to Russia during the early 1900s and the Tsar, Nicholas II. There's a parallel to France, and the character from France is supposed to be a parallel to Joan of Arc. There's a parallel to China. There's a parallel to Japan, Spain, and I drew out a map and made that whole thing. And I've been tinkering away at it for, I don't know, a couple months now, I think. I don't know when I started. But I've gotten pretty far with it, and it's been really interesting. So that's how I came up with that story itself. And now I'm just, I had to, there's so much new information, I had to make an information page with everyone's name, how old they are, what they look like, if they have any alliances with anybody, who that is, and I actually had to write out the years of certain occurrences and timelines for things, and bring out definitions for words that I created, and it's just this huge endeavor for the story. And I put so much time into it, and it's just become my baby. But I still have like 3 or 4 other side projects that I have, like that are open for me to work on, that I've kind of gone back and forth on if I have time, or if I'm kind of feeling kind of sluggish with this story about Monty. And from there, I can't really talk much about ending a story with this one because I'm about halfway through with it. But with the other one, the one about the orbs, the way I had the ending in mind from day one. I knew how I wanted to end it. I knew how I wanted to resolve everything. And that was always set in stone. So there's always a finish line. I just had to make sure I hit all of the necessary parts to get to that finish line and have it make sense. Now with this new one that I'm writing, that I'm halfway done with, I don't know what the finish line is. I have an idea of what I think I want it to be, but it's not set in stone, because there's so much more going on that it's kind of, I wouldn't say writing itself, but the world is evolving as fast as I can write it. I'll get to a point where I'll come to a roadblock and I'll be, shit, how do I get past this? Okay, if I go back 2 chapters and invent this character and have them go to this place and do this thing, then it'll open up this door. But then that also lets me open up multiple doors down the way. And I actually had to do that in this one, because I went really in depth about how far away each of these cities are from each other, because they're in different countries, according to my world map. And just for authenticity and to make this story flow a little better, because a lot of the chapters are going on at the same time, or there's a couple days discrepancy between them. I wanted it to feel like actual time was passing. So I found out how far certain cities were in real life, and that I just translated that time. So Monty gets on an airship with the crew and his friend Kale, so they can go to this country in the west to find this information broker type guy and get information from him. Well, they leave their city at like 9 in the morning, and the flight takes 18 hours, so they would have got there late at night. But I wrote that city in the daytime, because I want it to be in the daytime when they're there. So I had to figure out a way to make it, I could either just make it them go from their city to the next one in like 3 hours, but that just makes time go by way too fast and isn't reasonable. So I had to create a whole new stop in their journey. So they stop at this, like a midway point, stay the night, and then they leave, and then they get to their destination about midday, or like late in the day. So the sun's still out. Which that wasn't, when I was coming up with the idea, that place didn't exist. The characters in it didn't exist. I had to edit it on the fly, pretty much. Which, this story, there's a lot of that. A lot of this isn't set in stone, and a lot of it isn't already pre-planned. And in my writing, I've already come up with a prequel type story that I want to write, that talks about something that happened 300 years before this story even happened, that I find interesting enough that I want to tell it. So that's kind of a breakdown of how I've been doing what I've been doing. I'll sit down, I'll jot down a few notes on a piece of paper, and then I'll go. Just picking which character I want to see the world through at that time, and then go with that. And I've actually hit a sort of writer's block past week. Nothing might be related to work, but I couldn't figure out who I wanted to transition to, because the first chapter of part 2 is a fisherman. The second chapter of part 2 is a character from part 1. And then I was done with that chapter, and I was like, where do I go from there? How do I keep the story rolling without making it go too fast, so I can make this last 80 or like 100 pages on word processor where I'm writing it, to make it last 100 pages. And I don't want to sound that I need to drag things out, but I need to make sure I'm not just jumping from objective to objective as quickly as possible, because that's poor writing. It doesn't give the reader enough time to become the reader enough time to be attached to the characters in the story. So I've been dealing with that, and I've been dealing with making sure I'm staying consistent with what I write. That's why I've had to make notes for myself. And it's been, it's been fun, it's been chaotic, but I really hope that when I'm done with the first draft of book 1, that when I give it to certain people, that they can really appreciate what I put into it. Because it isn't really, I don't write like this because I want to become rich and famous, or I want to make a movie and become like J.K. Rowling, or Harry Potter fame or anything like that. That's not why I write. That'd be awesome if that happened, but that's not why I sat down and started writing this. I started writing it because I love these worlds that are in my brain that I just randomly come up with, and I want people to experience it as I do, because it's fun experiencing it by myself, but when I can share it with somebody else and they can experience it too, and I can see their emotion through my writing, like what I write is making them feel something, that's good enough for me. Like when people say that, except for my mom, sorry mom, but when you say you like my writing, I kind of take it as just like, oh, it's my mom, of course she's gonna like what I write. But when another person who isn't going to be so soft with me says that they appreciate what I've written and they like my ideas and they give me positive feedback and constructive criticism, it makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm actually doing something. And that's one of the reasons why I still write, and I still have these stories that I still want to translate to other people, because I could be selfish and just keep them for myself and not write them at all and just go over them in my brain and enjoy them on my own. But that's just a lonely way to live. And when you're done with your life, you look back on it and say, wow, I had all these cool ideas that I could have presented to everyone else, but I kept them to myself and I kept them in my own brain. After 70 years of life, you look back and you don't see that you've presented anything to the world. It's kind of like, wow, I wasted 70 years. So this is also my, legacy, is to write what's in my brain. So, I kind of rambled a little bit. I hope this was enough insight into why I write and what I write, and hopefully you can become excited and want to see this completed. I want to see it completed. But, I think I'm going to stop now and go back to writing, because I spent 45 minutes talking, like 30 minutes on this and 15 on something else, because I felt like I wanted to talk about it instead of just write about it. But if you're interested in talking to me or want to hear more, I'm probably going to do some other commentary on my own writing. I might actually do commentary on other writers that I appreciate. And I'll post those to my channel as well. So, this is, again, Matt. I haven't come up with a fancy name for my channel or a fancy name for myself, so I'll just stay with Matt. Matt Mead. And, all right. See you soon.